Welcome to another episode of military comparison between Israel and Iran. So let's begin. At first, global rank of Israel is 18, whereas global rank of Iran is 14th rank. Capital of Israel is Jerusalem, whereas Tehran is the capital of Iran. Nominal GDP of Israel is $520.700 billion, whereas GDP of Iran is $1.74 trillion. Population of Israel is 8,929,811, whereas population of Iran is 86,171,331. Isaac Herzog is the President of Israel, whereas Ibrahim Raisi is the President of Iran. Defense budget of Israel is $17.8 billion, whereas defense budget of Iran is $5 billion. Israel have 173,000 active personnel, whereas Iran has 575,000 active personnel. Israel have 465,000 reserve personnel, whereas Iran has 350,000 reserve personnel. Israel have 8,000 paramilitary forces, whereas Iran has 90,000 paramilitary forces. Israel have 1,900 tanks, whereas Iran has 2,831 tanks. Israel have 8,044 armored vehicles, whereas Iran has 7,600 vehicles. Israel have 522 MRAP, whereas Iran has 610 MRAP. Israel have 835 APC, whereas Iran has 2,460 APC. Israel have 48 mobile rocket projector, whereas Iran has 2,485 mobile rocket projector. Israel have 950 artillery, whereas Iran has 3,138 artillery. Israel have 597 aircrafts, whereas Iran has 543 aircrafts. Israel have 27 attack aircrafts, whereas Iran has 23 attack aircrafts. Israel have 241 fighter aircrafts, whereas Iran has 197 fighter aircrafts. Israel have 153 trainer aircrafts, whereas Iran has 96 trainer aircrafts. Israel have 15 transport aircrafts, whereas Iran has 85 transport aircrafts. Israel have 127 helicopters, whereas Iran has 126 helicopters. Israel have 48 attack helicopters, whereas Iran has 12 attack helicopters. Fleet strength of Israel is 67, whereas fleet strength of Iran is 142. Israel has 0 frigates, whereas Iran has 7 frigates. Israel has 7 corvettes, whereas Iran has 3 corvettes. Israel and Iran both have 0 destroyers. Israel have 5 submarines, whereas Iran has 19 submarines. Israel is having 80-400 nuclear, but it is not confirmed. Like and subscribe the channel for more contents. Thanks for watching.